Benito Mussolini wasn't born a dictator in a black uniform. He started as a schoolteacher's son. He was a failed journalist who dreamed of greatness and spent hours polishing his boots. But how did that ordinary man become the self-proclaimed savior of Italy? He preached strength, yet feared illness. He banned weakness, yet couldn't sleep without doctors nearby. How could a man so obsessed with power be ruled by his own paranoia? He spoke of honor, family, and sacrifice. But did he believe any of it while hiding mistresses and signing death orders from his desk? So, what did Benito Mussolini actually do all day? The mornings of Benito Mussolini began early, long before the city around him woke up. He liked to present himself as a man who never slept, a living engine of Italian willpower. But was it discipline or paranoia that pulled him out of bed before dawn? He rose between 5 and 6 in a small, Spartan bedroom inside Palazzo Venezia. No luxury, no silk sheets, only cold water, a hard mattress, and a clock set deliberately 5 minutes fast. Why? To remind himself, and everyone else, that time itself worked for him. He shaved quickly, dressed in military khaki, even on quiet days, and looked in the mirror as if facing an audience. His secretary said he practiced his facial expressions every morning. Did he already see the Duce staring back, or was he still trying to convince himself? Breakfast was small: fruit, coffee, sometimes dry toast. He despised long meals, calling them a waste of the state's time. Within minutes, he was seated at his desk, surrounded by newspapers. He read Il Popolo d'Italia, the paper he had founded decades earlier, line by line. If a journalist dared to print something too weak, too cautious, too soft, he'd scribble "idiot" in the margin and summon the editor. Was it really news he wanted, or proof of his own genius? By 7, the building filled with footsteps. Ministers, typists, and guards moved carefully, never too loud, never too relaxed. Everyone knew Mussolini hated lateness more than disobedience. His office clock was always ahead of the others, and so, to meet him on time, his staff arrived early. The Duce's obsession with control extended even to the minute hand. Between 8 and 10, he began dictating. Speeches, orders, telegrams, propaganda slogans, all delivered in a booming rhythm that echoed through the marble hallways. He liked the sound of his own voice so much that he often spoke faster than his secretaries could type. When he read what they'd written, he'd strike out entire paragraphs and start again. Did he believe that rewriting words could rewrite reality? He inspected letters from farmers, teachers, soldiers, ordinary Italians who wrote to their leader about prices, schools, and food shortages. He almost never replied, but he read many of them. Not out of empathy, but to sense the mood of his people. The Italian soul, he once said, must be read like a newspaper. Yet he never walked through the poor quarters of Rome again after taking power. Was he afraid of being loved too little or hated too much? At mid-morning, he would step onto the balcony overlooking Piazza Venezia. Crowds gathered below, waiting for a wave, a salute, a sign. He didn't always speak. Sometimes he just stood there, motionless, soaking in the noise. It was his favorite stage. He once confessed that the roar of the crowd feeds me better than bread. But what happens when the applause becomes habit, when the people no longer cheer for the man, but the myth? Behind the polished marble and rehearsed gestures, Mussolini's mornings were built on a fragile illusion that he alone carried the pulse of Italy. His daily rituals, the rigid schedule, the mirrored stare, the mountain of paperwork were less about work and more about survival. Each hour was proof to himself that the Duce never rested, never doubted, never aged. But could anyone live that way forever? Could a man so obsessed with control stop the world from changing around him? By midday, Mussolini's palace became a machine. Couriers ran through marble corridors, ministers waited outside his door, and every piece of paper from wheat harvests to secret arrests ended up on his desk. He claimed to read everything himself. "I am the heart of Italy," he said, "and every pulse must pass through me." But how long can one man pretend to feel the heartbeat of an entire nation? Lunch was quick, silent, almost joyless. A few vegetables, cheese, mineral water. He ate with one hand and signed orders with the other: prison sentences, censorships, decrees about loyalty. Did he ever pause before condemning a man, or did the pen move too easily in his fingers? After lunch came the parade of subordinates. Generals, ministers, factory directors, priests, all stood stiff while the Duce listened with arms folded, eyes fixed on them like a hawk. He hated hesitation. If someone stammered, he cut them off. If a report sounded weak, he shouted. His voice, once a weapon of persuasion, now ruled through fear. Even his ministers began copying his posture and handwriting, thinking it might save them from his temper. Outside, propaganda screamed, "Believe, obey, fight." Inside, the regime ran on silence. No one dared bring bad news. Statistics were polished, failures disguised as victories. Mussolini believed he was building a disciplined nation, but he had really built a theater, and he was its only actor. Each afternoon, he met with police chiefs and the OVRA, his secret security service. They brought thick files, teachers accused of disloyalty, students whispering anti-fascist jokes, priests caught preaching too freely. Punish gently, but punish, Mussolini would say. But behind that phrase lay exile, beatings, and fear that reached into every town. Was cruelty the cost of control, or simply the fuel that kept his power alive? Later came the show. Photographers were allowed into his office to capture the image of the tireless Duce, sleeves rolled up, phone in hand, maps of Africa behind him. On other days, he posed driving a tractor, wielding a hammer, or shirtless in a wheat field. Italians saw a leader of iron. The truth was that every pose was rehearsed, every bead of sweat sprayed by assistants to make him glisten like a god under the Sunday. He called himself a man of the people, yet he trusted no one. He had microphones hidden in offices, walls built thicker to stop eavesdropping, and secretaries replaced at the first sign of fatigue. He often said, "Better to be feared than loved it lasts longer." But did he ever notice that even fear fades when hunger begins to bite? By late afternoon, his focus turned to speeches. He slashed through drafts, replacing soft words with sharp commands. "I will. I command. I conquer." He practiced in front of mirrors, adjusting the tilt of his chin, the rise of his eyebrow, the pause before the thunder. Mussolini didn't just rule through speeches, he performed them. He was both director and actor in his own empire of applause. Letters from Hitler arrived frequently. Mussolini admired his energy but feared his ambition. "The Germans are machines," he once muttered, "and we are improvisers." Still, he followed the German path, convincing himself that Italy could march like Prussia if only he willed it hard enough. But what happens when a nation pretends itself into exhaustion? As evening approached, the marble corridors cooled and the echo of typewriters faded. Mussolini stood at his window, watching Rome move beneath him: cars, flags, soldiers, clerks. The city seemed orderly, obedient, proud. He mistook that stillness for loyalty. Yet outside the capital, resentment grew like cracks beneath stone. His dictatorship functioned like his day, perfectly timed, tightly controlled, but hollow at its core. And as the sun sank over the domes of Rome, the Duce still believed he ruled history itself, not realizing that history had already begun to move without him. When the doors of Palazzo Venezia finally closed to visitors, Mussolini's mask slipped just a little. The Duce, who terrified ministers, turned into a man pacing the same polished floorboards, restless, sleepless, and strangely alone. Power for him was a noise that couldn't be turned off. And when it went quiet, he didn't know what to do with himself. Dinner was small, eaten quickly, usually eggs, salad, or soup. He rarely drank alcohol, convinced it weakened discipline. Instead, he obsessed over his health. Every ache was studied, every cough examined. Doctors and masseurs were summoned at odd hours. He feared aging more than assassination. A leader, he said, must look eternal. But how long can a man play God before he starts fearing the mirror? He often retreated to his study after dark, dictating letters, reading reports, or scrawling notes to his mistress, Clara Petacci. Their affair, an open secret, filled hundreds of pages of correspondence. He wrote to her about headaches, insomnia, his dislike of courtiers, and his belief that no one truly understood him. To her, he wasn't the Duce, just Benito. Yet even in love, he commanded. He told her what to eat, what to wear, when to speak. Power had soaked too deep into him to leave any room for tenderness. Sometimes he played the violin. The sound was harsh, uneven, but he said it calmed his nerves. He also fenced to keep the blood awake or read histories of Caesar and Napoleon, underlining passages about destiny and betrayal. His nightstand held both Plutarch and medical pamphlets on ulcers. What kind of man spends his nights studying emperors and stomach pain at once? In private, Mussolini's mood swung between arrogance and despair. He confessed to aides that Italians did not deserve him, that his ministers were cowards, his generals incompetent. Yet he could not let go of them or his power. Even his family felt like an audience. His wife, Rochelle, lived mostly apart from him. His children saw their father more on postcards than in person. "The state," he once told her, "is my true home." By midnight, he would still be awake, pacing. The palace lights stayed on long after the city slept. Typists yawned, guards exchanged nervous glances. Mussolini would reappear suddenly, demanding another report or telegram. He said he worked 16 hours a day, but much of that time was spent fighting the silence he couldn't stand. Behind the myth of the Iron Man was a human machine wound too tight, unable to rest, afraid of stillness, haunted by the thought that without work, applause, or headlines, he might simply disappear. When he finally turned out the light, his sleep came in fragments, shallow, uneasy, filled with dreams of betrayal and noise. The Duce never stopped ruling, even in his mind. But what kind of ruler keeps governing a world that exists only in his own imagination? By the last years of the war, Mussolini's once mighty routine had collapsed into fragments. The man who once ruled from marble halls now woke in a borrowed villa beside Lake Garda, the capital of his new puppet state, the Italian Social Republic. He called it a rebirth. In truth, it was a graveyard with a flag. He still rose early, but not from discipline, any more from anxiety. The mornings were cold and quiet. No ministers waited at the door, no photographers arranged his tie. Only German officers who treated him like a tired actor past his prime. He still wore his uniform, but it hung loose on his frame. His hair had gone gray, his eyes dull. "I am a corpse," he whispered once to his mistress, Clara Petacci, "but I walk." He spent hours reading reports that meant nothing, fake production numbers, propaganda about victories that never happened. When he tried to issue commands, Berlin ignored them. Italy was already crumbling, and the Duce had become a spectator of his own fall. Yet he kept pretending. He held council meetings, gave speeches to small groups of soldiers, even ordered statues to be cleaned. What makes a man cling to ceremony when the world has already moved on? His meals grew simpler, his voice weaker. He reread Roman history endlessly. Caesar, Augustus, Nero, trying to find in their downfalls some meaning for his own. They too were betrayed, he muttered. But was it betrayal, or simply the end of illusion? At night, he wandered the villa gardens, talking to guards, staring at the mountains. He told them he still believed Italy would rise again, that Hitler would send new divisions, that fate would reverse itself. But his guards looked away. Even they could see the emperor's crown had turned to dust. The letters he wrote to Petacci became stranger, a mix of self-pity and prophecy. If I die, he told her, history will understand me. But history had already made up its mind. By the spring of 1945, the Allies closed in. The roads were full of refugees and smoke. Mussolini packed his papers and fled north in a German convoy, disguised in a helmet and coat too big for him. The man who once commanded millions was now hiding in the back of a truck, clutching his mistress's hand. He said nothing for hours. Perhaps for the first time in decades, he had nothing left to command. When partisans stopped the convoy near the village of Dongo, he didn't fight, he just waited. The final photograph taken of him shows a blank face, neither proud nor afraid, only empty. In the end, Mussolini's days, once filled with speeches, salutes, and signatures, ended in silence. The routine that had sustained his myth dissolved into the same chaos he had unleashed on others. He had spent his life believing that history was a stage built for his voice alone. But when the curtain finally fell, the Duce discovered there was no audience left to applaud. Mussolini built his life around control, his image, his words, his myth, but in the end, all of it collapsed in silence. Do you think Mussolini truly believed he was saving Italy, or just himself? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.